In 2018, long before I had a YouTube channel, I had a client reach out to me for consulting on this 300-acre piece of property here. And they said, Dr. Warren, I want you to help me restore this property to the way the southeastern forest used to look pre-European settlement. The one way we do that is to introduce fire. So for millions of years, the southeastern landscape has lived with fire. There's tons of plants that, in order to complete their life cycle, they need to be exposed to fire. For example, the entire longleaf ecosystem needs fire in order to germinate. The pines need it to germinate. All the understory plants need it to germinate. And that's what we see here behind us. This is what the forest in the southeastern United States used to look like before European settlement and we started to suppress fires. I know Smokey the Bear, it's a big thing, and it's done a lot of good to prevent like out of control fires that we don't need, but we need to start incorporating control burns like we have done here behind me in order to keep some of these species off the endangered species list. What I want to do with you is kind of walk you through the process, show you some before and afters of areas that have been burned, have not been burned, show you the difference, show you some of the understory plants that have come back. It really is a mecca here in terms of the diversity of plants that we see that are native. And not only that, the wildlife that has returned to this area. There are so many deer, turkey, fox squirrels, quail, things that you don't see as often, but you hear our grandparents or great-grandparents talk about, oh, we used to have a lot of fox squirrels, we used to have a lot of quail. They're on this property, and it's all because we have put fire back into rotation here. About every 3 to 5 years, different quadrants of this property have received fire. So let's go around and take a look at some things. So we're underneath a forest canopy here. It's an open forest canopy. It's a mix of pine and oak. And we've got all these different species of carex that are popping up that was not here before. We've got some native oats popping up here. Just all sorts of grasses just in this one little area. So one thing that we see popping up after a control burn are also native flowers. So the birds will eat the seed heads off of these flowers. Two in particular are echinacea and also black-eyed Susans. And these are some little black-eyed Susans that are beginning to pop up right here. You'll see some of this. This is food for the birds. In order to have a lot of wildlife on a property, you need to increase the carrying capacity of that land. So carrying capacity means how many individuals of a species can we have per acre or per 1,000 feet, however you want to look at it. So if you're trying to attract wildlife, for example, deer, one thing you can do is to come through, control burn an area that's predominantly hardwood. So like this white oak behind me here, this is kind of a oak tree basin here. There's a lot of oaks. There's a little bit of pine mixed in, but it's mainly hardwood. So what's happening here? Starting in April and May and through the summer, all these grasses and forbs are coming up. This is forage for our wildlife. So they're feeding on that. As this stuff goes dormant, so we have our first frost, say in October, somewhere around Halloween, we're going to have a frost. The acorns begin to fall off of these trees, and that supplies them with food in October, November, December, and into January. And now that we're into February, what we're seeing is some of the grasses and forbs are starting to come back up. There is year-round food in this ecosystem for all of the wildlife in here. And that's one thing that you can accomplish on your property by doing control burns, say once every 5 years in a certain area. You're not only going to get rid of invasive species that can't handle fire, so for example things like privet and kudzu, you're going to get rid of all that stuff. All your natives, they're going to pop up. The ash from the fire, what that's going to do, that is nutrients for those plants that are going to come up. The seeds that are native to the southeastern United States, they can survive that fire going over the top of them. They've got a clean seed bed at that point, and they'll pop up, and it's incredible the things that we see come up. So we're right on the edge of a fire break line here. So we're looking at an area right here that was not burned. And if I pan to the left, you can see, you can still kind of see the fire break. It's right in here. You can see this open canopy forest that we have here. And that is what we're after. This is what the forest looked like for millions of years before European settlement. So we would have fires come through and burn. William Bartram was one of the first to document this. He was a naturalist that came through the Southeast. Also, if you read Hernando de Soto's memoirs, he was a conquistador that came through in the 1500s. They talk about riding horses at full gallop through the forest. And if you think about it, you could ride a horse through there at full gallop, no problem. But something that hasn't been burned for 50 to 100 years. An important thing to remember if you're going to incorporate control burns on a property is you need to have what we call a fire break. So a fire break can be a road, or it can be like a place through the woods that's been tilled over where fire can't jump from one side to the other, especially along property lines where you don't want fire to jump the break and get onto your neighbor's property. So this is another example of a fire break. We talked about roads or an area through the woods that had been tilled. And this is what this is behind us here. This is an old roadbed that we just keep tilled up or mowed down. It needs to be mowed. It hadn't been mowed in about 2 years, but before we do another fire, we'll come through here and we'll mow this down. Let's take a look at the map of this property. I want to show you from aerial view what the fire breaks look like on this property and show you how this property is being rotated to properly manage for a native ecosystem here. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is define the property line so you know the area that we're looking at. So the screen here actually goes outside of the property lines. I wanted to show you guys how this property lays in relation to everything else. So the property here goes straight down this wood line. So this is farmland that does not belong to the owner. And comes right down through this swamp. All of this is swamp on the left-hand side and the bottom side. And about in here, the property line comes across this way, just below this duck pond right here that has been built. And if you look real close, right here on the right, you will see the fire break. It's right, that straight line right there. Fire break runs all the way up to here, and then it winds off. So there's a fire break that continues right there. You can see it. And then there's going to be another fire break that cuts right. You can see the differentiation in the trees right here. There's a fire break that runs all the way to here. And so what we've done, we've quadrant this area off. So we'll call this quadrant 1. So the fire break line from here to here, all of this is 1. Fire break 2 is going to be across the road here. So all of this we kind of manage as 1 in this area here. There's some fields, there's another duck pond, there's this wooded area in here as well. It'll get a control burn. This fire break here, all the way down, you see where the swamp starts in here. This isn't going to burn. This stays wet year-round, ankle to knee-deep water. A lot of tupelos and aquatic species down in here. So that serves as a natural fire break right there. So from here to here, this will get burned. And then from here over, so across this road, this duck pond here, from here back up, there's another little fire break I forgot to mention. It runs right, you can kind of see it. It's not a straight fire break, but it runs right in here. And so this is quadrant 4. So year 1, this will get burned. Year 2, this will get burned. Year 3, this will get burned. Year 4, this will get burned. And on the 5th year, we can start up here again, or sometimes we could take a rest year. We'll just see how far the succession of the vegetation is in here. And if it's we're getting a lot of invasives like privet and kudzu, we can come in and burn. If not, we'll just let it go for a little bit. And this serves the wildlife so well, where they're coming in, like the second year after a burn, all this is full of vegetation, and they feed in this area all the time. And then the next year when we're burning here, this is going to have a lot of soot in it and ash, and the turkeys love getting in that area and looking for bugs and stuff. And then by the second year, it's so green again, and there's so much food, and so the wildlife, they just kind of make the circle with the fire program that we have in place. So I've kind of crawled back into the woods to an area where It has not been controlled burn yet. We're currently working on this in terms of fire breaks and getting everything just right to burn. But what are we trying to get rid of? This is privet. It is not native to the southeastern United States. It takes over everywhere. This is native to China. And it's species like this, if we use a control burn, our native species will be just fine. However, all of these invasives cannot handle that fire. We're going to get rid of all the privet that's in here by doing a control burn. So perhaps the best way to go about doing a control burn is to have somebody that's certified to do it. There's licensed control burners in the southeastern United States. They have the training to do that. You can reach out to somebody that has that training. And as a private landowner, you have the right to burn on your property. You just have to give the authorities the heads up that, hey, we're going to do this. And they'll say, yes, you can do it on this day or no on that day. Like today, they probably wouldn't give permission for a landowner to burn. It's very windy. Typically, you want to do this on a day where there's not a lot of wind, and also the humidity levels are a little bit higher. So you want humidity levels up 40 to 50% or higher than that. Today is very dry. If I had to guess, the humidity is probably in the 20s or 30s. We've got a hard northwest wind coming with a cold front here today, and so it'd be a terrible day to burn today. We'd have flames jumping fire breaks and getting on neighbors' properties and stuff like that. But those are things to consider if you're going to do a control burn to get a forest that looks like this. Considering the primary objective for the landowner here was to make wildlife habitat. So we introduced the control burns to increase the forage in the understory of the forest and also to provide some nutrients for the trees that were already there. We talked about the acorns, but some of these areas that were dominated by invasive species like privet, and there really weren't any trees, like here behind me, this field. We came in, we burned this field, and now we plant this field on a rotation. So we did sorghum and corn in this field in the spring, and that came up. We tilled it over, and we put some clover down and some grass seed down, and that's the green you see behind me here. So this field provides wildlife with all sorts of food. There's so much food here for the wildlife. Just the other day, I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love coming out here. I was sitting in a deer blind just off this field, and there was a huge tom turkey that came strutting across this field. This is in December. And there was a jake over here beside the field, and they got in a fight, and it was really fun to watch. That probably doesn't happen on every property. The landowner here has put a lot of time and effort in to restoring this habitat so that something like that happens, where a lot of times we don't see that anymore. I feel like part of my job is somebody that teaches college in horticulture and ecology and biology, is to educate people on how the ecosystem here works. I think in the general public, we think fire is a terrible thing, and it can be. Don't get me wrong. When fuel loads build up in the forest floor for 50, 60, 70 years, and then we have these massive fires, that's a terrible thing. But you've got to remember that on average, every 5 to 10 years, any given acre in the southeast would burn. It was a low fuel load. It would burn for a few hundred acres and fizzle out. It wouldn't get up in the canopy of the trees. And that is what we're trying to do on some of these properties. The state of Alabama is doing this as well. So Oak Mountain State Park, Talladega National Forest, they have implemented control burns on those properties. And we're seeing all sorts of native plants come back that have been missing from the park for 50 years. The seed bank is here. We just have to bring the fire in to bring those back. Guys, as always, thank you for watching The Plant Doctor. And until next time, happy gardening.